So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Brannigan and I'm the CEO of Electricity Human Resources Canada. Thank you all for joining us today. I know that many of you are thinking about vacations right now, so I do really appreciate you being here. I know that you'll all find some interesting takeaways that may shape how you and your company plans to attract and recruit new talent going forward. As we know, the Canadian electricity sector is undergoing a demographic shift. As older workers begin to transition out of the workforce, we're seeing gaps emerging across a wide range of occupations, and they span engineering, the trades, business, communications, technology, and others. Now, young Canadians possess the skills and the knowledge to fill these roles, but they're not coming to work in this sector. Our last LMI, or Labour Market Intelligence, data reported that only 5% of this sector are comprised of youth. Now, as Canada's go-to organization for electricity human resources needs, we conducted research to find out why. So our latest report, Generation Impact, Future Workforce Perspectives, surveyed over 1,500 young workers across the country. We found that the biggest barrier to youth interest in pursuing a career in the electricity sector was a lack of knowledge about the nature of the sector and the depth of careers that are actually available. Now, this insight presents us with a key opportunity to bring on a new generation of workers and to really foster innovation. But to maintain a strong workforce, the sector is going to have to position itself competitively to attract young employees. And in order to do that, of course, we need to understand their values and their motivations. So if you're on this call, you likely know that there are many varied, very rewarding career paths in electricity. We are an essential service, but this message so far has not been heard by the young talent entering the Canadian workforce. And on another note, today is World Youth Skills Day. It's a United Nations recognized holiday that focuses on the importance of youth employment and skills development. This year's focus is on ensuring continuity during the COVID-19 pandemic, recognizing that youth make a substantial contribution to the essential skills needed even during the most turbulent times. And so as we discuss this report today, I ask that you keep in mind the ways that youth contribute to our economy and innovation, and remember that we cannot leave them behind during hardship. Now, I also want to acknowledge the support of our partners. So the Alberta Electricity System Operator, or AESO, Electra, Skills Canada, and the Society of United Professionals, all of which have supported this report because they believe in our next generation of workers. Now, the Government of Canada is a dedicated supporter of our work and our sector. To speak on behalf of Natural Resources Canada, I would like to now invite Paul Lefebvre, Member of Parliament for Sudbury, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Lefebvre, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michelle. Bon après-midi tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am calling, or actually joining you in your offices or home from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people here in the Sudbury area. So it's great to join you, if only by virtually, but to help launch this important new report. It is fitting that it is being launched today. As Michelle mentioned, it's World Youth Skills Day. I don't think we planned it that way to do this, the launch of the report today, but it's really very fitting. So as you all know, youth are the key to our economic prosperity, and they are the leaders of not only tomorrow, but of today. So engaging and supporting youth so we can together address our current and future challenges is a priority for our government. It's why in the past year, we launched Canada's first ever youth policy, developed jointly with young Canadians. It's why this report is so important and the first of its kind. A report that looks at what young people think about a career in Canada's electricity sector, not by guesswork, not by making assumptions, but actually asking them. And we're also exploring their levels of interest in the sector and knowledge of the types of exciting and rewarding jobs that await them, and then providing a roadmap for engaging them. So why is this report so important? For two main reasons. First, because young people and women are underrepresented in this industry. And that's a problem as the current workforce ages and eventually retires. We need to recruit younger workers to take their places, a diverse workforce to lead the charge in this critical industry. Second, this report matters because electricity matters to meeting our climate change goals, to creating good jobs, and to shaping the global transitions to cleaner forms of energy. For Canada, that transition offers an opportunity to dream big by creating an economy powered by clean and affordable electricity. And we are well positioned to do this. Canada has one of the best non-emitting electricity mixes in the world, with each region bringing its own strength. Hydroelectricity, Quebec, Manitoba, BC, nuclear energy in Ontario and New Brunswick, and wind and solar from coast to coast. Electrification isn't just an opportunity, it's an imperative. Because let's be clear, Canada will not meet its climate change goals unless we drive clean electricity to every corner of our economy, including into sectors that are energy intensive, such as transportation, heating, mining, and oil and gas extraction. By imagining an economy powered by clean sources of electricity, we can transform existing industries and create entirely new ones, strengthening Canada's competitiveness and protecting the environment. The report you're launching today takes us closer to that future by building a bridge between an industry looking for young talent and young Canadians looking for jobs that are fulfilling, innovative, and well paid. Through the Student Work Placement Program, I'm proud to say that our government has provided $13.7 million to support your organization and the important work that you do. We also understand the importance of giving young people a leg up, which is why over the past 3 years, we've invested $25 million in youth employment through our Green Jobs program and created over 1,700 STEM jobs for youth within the natural resources sector. Today, I'm also delighted to announce funding for 2 other initiatives that will also advance our environmental and reconciliation goals. First, we are providing more than $200,000 to OP Wind services in Fort William, Ontario. So in partnership with the Independent Electricity System Operator, this funding will be used to engage Indigenous youth from rural and remote Northern Ontario First Nations to increase awareness of the energy sector, to plug them into avenues to participate in renewable and energy efficiency projects, and to give them the tools to become leaders in their communities. Second, we are investing more than $260,000 in the Matawa First Nations communities to develop energy literacy among young and elders alike, and to encourage youth from these remote communities to pursue careers in clean energy and the electricity sector. In both cases, these investments will help build capacity and community leadership to reduce dependency on diesel and pave the way to cleaner sources of energy in our rural and remote Indigenous communities. So it's an important day for these communities and an important day for the electricity sector as a whole. So congratulations again to EHRC and all those involved with this outstanding report. I know it will make an enormous contribution to our energy future, and I'm pleased that we'll be hearing directly from youth panelists shortly today on World Youth Skills Day. It's important as ever that we look at how we can further support youth in reaching their goals and learning skills they need to pursue the careers that will transform our future. Merci, Miigwech.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I know firsthand how dedicated yourself and this government and Natural Resources Canada are to our electricity sector, demonstrated by those 2 very exciting initiatives that you have mentioned, and your support is tremendously appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, I am delighted to invite David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data, to speak to the findings of the report. So this is what you're here for, to get into the nuts and bolts. David and his team at Abacus conducted the research, and David is a wealth of knowledge and insight on this topic. And now following the presentation on the research and the recommendations, there's going to be time for audience questions. So please have your questions ready before we hear from a wonderful panel of young employees in the sector. So millennials and Gen Z about their experiences. So I'm quite excited for that part of today's event. But with that, I'm going to hand over the mic to David Coletto of Abacus for an overview. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Mr. Lefebvre. Pleasure to see you as well. Welcome everybody. It's a very exciting day. We've been working on this project for much of the past number of months, and it's exciting that it's out in the public realm. I'm going to share my screen so I can jump right into the data. As Michelle said, this project really came out of a desire to better understand what young Canadians are thinking about not only their own career goals, what are they looking for in a type of work, but what are their perceptions and understandings of the electricity sector, and how can we better align the two so that organizations across the country can better recruit and retain young people into the sector, so we can increase not only youth participation, but as well diversity in terms of gender and other categories. So I'll jump right into the study, and as Michelle said, I'm happy to take any questions at the end as they come up to you. Very briefly, we did this survey as it happened right before the pandemic really took. So that's an asterisk to put on some of these results, is that this was done prior to the pandemic. But in fact, when you look at the results, you're going to see that many of the themes we saw, what young Canadians are looking for in work, I suspect will only be stronger today as we head into a much more challenging economic situation. And the idea that there are going to be many jobs in this sector going forward will actually make work in electricity more appealing going forward. But we did a survey of 1,500 Canadians aged 18 to 36. It was representative of the population by age, gender, region, official language, and the type of education they had, whether they had any post-secondary education or not, and what type of post-secondary education. So this is a large national survey that gives us the ability to dig a little deeper and look for differences across group or region, or even inclination to join the sector. As I mentioned, we had a number of objectives. Just to be clear, the four that I think are most important was for us to better profile and understand who are the key targets for the sector. Who are those already saying that they would be open or interested in a career in the electricity sector, and how do they differ from those who might not? And understanding those gaps so that if we wanted to attract those who may not be inclined at this stage to think that a career in electricity is right for them, how do you do that? Two is to better understand what is appealing to millennials and to older members of Gen Z in terms of a career. There's a lot of myths out there about what millennials want or what young people want. And what we wanted to do was bring some data to either back up and confirm those myths, or, as you'll see in a moment, bust some of them and demonstrate that at the core, millennials or young Canadians are, I think, very similar to older ones in terms of what they seek in work. Then we shifted gears and really wanted to understand how is the sector perceived, both overall in terms of its role in Canada, in terms of an energy producer, the different sectors of energy, different types of energy, but also perceptions around what are jobs in the sector like, in terms of pay, in terms of availability, in terms of diversity. And then we tested a number of messages so that as you all are out there trying to recruit people, you have almost a toolkit on the types of things you should be talking about and the ways to connect the interests of young people, their desire to have a purpose, because they've got choices. And one of the things we're learning in all the work that I've been doing in this field, looking at work and younger generations, is that you have to sometimes throw some assumptions away, that we may not understand the types of jobs that exist, the titles that we might use to describe them. And so understanding that language and the broader story is important. So let's get right into it. And I think, as a market researcher, I'm always interested in slicing and dicing up the audience that we're speaking to. And what's clear is there is a market, there is an audience for electricity. When we ask people, which of the following best describes your thoughts about a career in the electricity sector, you can see that those that say they definitely would consider it are a small minority, 13%. But if you think that there's about 1 million Canadians 10 million Canadians in the group that we surveyed, that's not an insignificant number of people to start with. So that is your core audience. If you extend that and you say, oh, those who say, I'm open to it, you get to almost half of the population. So you've got a good size group. And if we break it out throughout this presentation, I'm going to speak about those that I describe as most receptive to the sector, those already, I think, listening and open to exploring a career. Maybe they're already in it. Maybe they've taken studies that have them on the right path towards certain types of jobs in the sector. Then there's another group I'm going to call the less receptive. They're open to it. They haven't shut the door completely, but they'll probably need more convincing and more understanding. There's a third group, what I'm calling the inaccessibles. They're going to be the hardest to convince and convert. And as I'll show you, their perceptions are guided by two things. One is their views are quite different from the other two groups in how they feel about the industry. But a second fact is they don't know very much. And so that lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding is a barrier for them to being open to the sector going forward. And so those two dynamics, if you want to expand the tent, are things to think about. Now, from a demographic perspective, I don't think it's surprising, given even the labor market statistics that Michelle mentioned earlier, that men are more likely to be in either the most receptive or less receptive groups than women are. So attracting women remains, in terms of just the base opportunity, perhaps more difficult. But don't also forget that about a quarter, of those that are most receptive are women, are young women. And so there's an opportunity there to attract them. The other good news in some of this, and I'll speak to both Indigenous respondents in our survey, as well as those from racialized or visible minority communities, they appear not less likely to want to join the industry. In fact, in some cases more interested and open to doing it. So that opportunity to increase diversity, attract people from different types of communities, this survey points to that as being absolutely positive and possible. We also looked at sort of where, from an educational perspective, prospects or different audiences are coming from. What this basically shows is, not surprising, those in the most receptive or less receptive groups already have or are taking training and education that more align with some of the work, engineering, technology, business management, computers. What we see is that among those in social science and humanities, not surprising, they represent the highest proportion of those in the inaccessible group. But even in that category, someone like me who's got a political science degree, there's a sizable group who are open and interested in a career in the sector. So, you know, my recommendation is not to silo people based on their education, but to recognize that across the entire sector, there is a role for people from all walks of life, but also all forms of education and things that they studied. So the big question, and if I had the exact answer on all of this, I might be doing something completely different, because we're all struggling with this, right? And I always get this. I do a lot of public speaking and workshops across the country with different employers who are always wondering, how do we get young people to think about our company, our organization, our sector? It's almost as if we're somehow, you know, and I put myself as young, but I'm almost 40, so maybe I should stop saying me. But, you know, we're gonna have a great panel in a moment, and we can learn from them directly, but there is no enigma to what young people want. And what our survey showed is they want pretty much what everybody wants out of work. And this is a little bit of the myth busting, right? They do want good pay. They want job security. Perhaps more than older generations when they were starting their careers, they are seeking work-life balance. In the COVID world, that's perhaps even more important today than it was when we did this survey. They are looking for interesting work, and they want some flexibility in their work. So these are all things that if you asked my mom when she was, you know, in her 20s starting her career, she'd probably say the same thing. In my mind, the big fundamental difference between young generations today and previous generations at the same age is their expectations are much higher about what work should be, about the kinds of jobs they're looking for. and they believe they have more control over their own destiny. And so being able to communicate and align your own priorities as an organization and the types of talent you seek with the actual market, I think is particularly important. And so from our survey, when we asked young Canadians, how important are these to your career choice? I focus your eye on the green bar. And that's the percentage of people say these items are very important to me. And if you go down the list and you look at the order, pay, job security, and lifestyle, get you close to half of young people overall saying, these are very important to me. And so this points to, again, I think perhaps a surprising result in some ways, because we always hear it's always about purpose. It's always about, my values and what it says about who I am, which are important, but it still matters. The table stakes are, am I fairly paid? Is there security in my work? And do you give me the kind of lifestyle that I seek? Those three things are particularly important. If you go down the list then and you ask yourselves, okay, what else do I need to do? This is where storytelling matters. And the work that you're asking someone to do, to enter, to spend time investing not only their money in terms of potential tuition and training, but also their time and their commitment is this worth it? Why am I waking up every day to come into the office or to the workplace? Is the work fulfilling? Is it interesting? Is it challenging? These are all things that you can see almost all young people say are at least somewhat important, but more say are very important to them. Now, when we actually ask people, let's rank these items from most important to least important. Here's what people say are in their top three. So pay by far ellipses everything else, and that's not surprising. People expect to be paid a certain amount, and they're looking to be able to cover their costs, save for a down payment on a home, because that's something that all young people seek and want to be able to do, allows them to live the lifestyle they want. But there's a second tier where job security, lifestyle, fulfilling work, and a flexible work schedule emerge. And these 5 items, from pay all the way to flexible work, are items that if they're communicated clearly in the description of the jobs that are available, in the values that your workplace have, are going to, I think, be more effective at attracting people at the starting point. But it's not enough, and it's not going to be the only thing that matters. Then we get into the type of place and the type of work that young people want to do. And so what we did here is we asked people, which of these 2 statements or words better describes how you like to work? And if you just take a snapshot of the screen, the first thing is there's no one size fits all for everybody. Some people want to work in a team, some want to work alone. More want to be active than, for example, being sedentary for most of the day. Almost 50-50 split on working with my hands or working at a desk. And you can go down the list, right? And the point here again is that when we unpack this a little bit, as I'll show you in a minute, those most receptive to the sector, they start to lean towards one area, but you have an ability to speak to the range of jobs that are available, and how do you align what somebody wants and what they want to do with the kind of work that you're looking to fill. Now, this chart shows those most receptive to electricity. So we filtered out everybody else. And what it basically shows is there are some differences among this particular group. They are more inclined to want to work with a team. They're more inclined to want to work with their hands. They're more open to traveling. And for them, solving problems is something that's really important. And when you think about the types of people that are naturally attracted to engineering, the trades, that solving problems, about not minding getting kind of dirty at work is a natural inclination. But it doesn't mean that all jobs obviously are there and are described that way. But it's important for this group. The second thing that we really wanted to understand in this study is, how do young Canadians feel about the electricity sector overall? It's gotten lots of attention. We live every day, but sometimes, and I've done this in other work we've done in natural resources, we take for granted often how the lights get turned on and the amount of work and investment in capital and human capital it takes to keep the system running. But the good news is, unlike some of the other sectors I've worked with, you don't have an image problem, right? So half of young Canadians have a positive impression of the electricity sector. When we break that down by the three key groups that we're talking about, you can see that those most receptive to the sector are also much more likely to have a positive view. And as you go down sort of the receptiveness list, you can see that that positive number declines. Now, it's not because, now you're going to say, well, 38% among inaccessible, that's a pretty low positive number. But it's important to note that it's not because they all think that there's a negative view, but to some, there's some negativity attached to it. And so understanding why do they have negative views about the sector, how can you improve the overall image of the sector becomes important. But the thing here is there's a strong relationship between being open to working in the sector and having a positive view on it. And for me, the reason that's so important and the image of your sector matters so much is because not only does my job and my career matter to me personally, but we increasingly live in a world where we've always cared what other people think of us, but we now live in a social media world where it matters even more. I call it almost like the era of personal branding. And so I always ask the question of sectors or of employers, what does it say about who I am that I work for you or I work in this sector? And it's important to continually be telling the positive story about what the sector is doing. Now, the good news is as we continue to shift our energy and electricity production to more renewable or green technologies, renewable energy has a more positive view among young Canadians. 61% have a positive impression, and you can see that it gets quite high among those more receptive to the sector. And I'll say that very few Canadians have a negative view of renewable energy, so continually talking about it. But the other important distinction about your sector versus others is how do you compare? And so what we did in this survey is we asked young Canadians to also, early on in the survey, tell us how they felt about a number of other sectors. And so here you can see where renewable energy and electricity fall in the ordering. And as I said, the good news is these are, relatively speaking, more positive than some other sectors, right? If you look at mining, oil and gas, much higher negatives among the entire cohort. Manufacturing, construction, not so much negative as more neutral. And then you've got electricity and renewable energy quite high near the top. And again, I'll keep in mind, these are before COVID. We asked today about healthcare and other sectors, they'd be a little bit higher because of the profile that they've gotten. We also have done work in the trucking sector, for example, and prior to the pandemic, the trucking sector had quite a negative perception. That's improved given the focus that has been on the importance of truck driving, the essential nature of that work in many of the same ways that your sector is also deemed so essential to just life in general and the economy more broadly. When we look at all respondents and we break out, where, how people feel about the sector, I think the point of this slide is to show while men and women do have a sizable difference, there's a gender gap in perceptions. That gender gap is not that women have more negative views than men, it's that they have less of a well-defined understanding of the sector. But we don't see a lot of differences by age within the cohort, by urban or rural, or even regional. That there's a consistency in this. And so not, if you're an organization in Atlantic Canada, you're going to have as same type of audience for those living in your region than say those in BC or Ontario or Quebec. So not a big difference across these regional or demographic groups. We also obviously looked at different sources of energy and how electricity is generated, and not surprising, renewable sources like solar, renewable energy more generally, and wind elicit much more positive views than other sources of electricity. Natural gas generally has a positive view. You can see coal at the bottom, not so positive overall. But I highlighted nuclear energy. I work with the Canadian Nuclear Association as well. And this has been a constant struggle is communicating nuclear. And that's obviously important in Ontario and New Brunswick, where so much of our electricity is generated from this source, that managing that story is a separate story, but even there, you've got not as negative, I think, views of nuclear energy as perhaps you would have had in previous generations at the same age. So that's a positive thing, but something still to monitor, given how important that source of electricity is. And in my personal view, more important it's going to be going forward as we try to replace other forms of fossil fuel generation. Among the most receptive to the sector, you can see these green bars grow even larger. And that's expected given their openness to working in the sector. Coal still has a negativity, but not as much. But certainly renewables, natural gas, even nuclear energy finds it almost 60% or more saying it has a positive view. So all sources of generation are deemed pretty positive. Now, when we go a little deeper then, so we've got broad perceptions of the sector that are generally positive and compare well to, I would say, sectors you're competing with people, for people to consider a career in. We wanted to go and understand perceptions around the type of work within the sector. And so what I'm about to show you is the good news. These are things that those both receptive and to some extent those who even inaccessible to the sector believe are true, and these are positive feelings. So when we ask people, do you think, for example, jobs in electricity provide good pay and benefits? 82% of those most receptive believe that's true. Only 10% say it's false. And you can see even among those who right now wouldn't consider a job, most say that's true. So that's a good starting point, because that signals to those interested or thinking about a work that, I believe I'm going to make good pay and benefits, which, as I showed you earlier, is the top consideration for more young people than any other factor. Pension plans. Again, we often take for granted that young people don't want to, save for retirement or think about their retirement security. But a pension plan is something that would actually attract. And so given that many organizations in the sector are either public sector or have pre-existing workplace pension plans, that's an attractive feature for young people, particularly now, particularly when the world seems uncertain, the future is unsure, that is a nice benefit that comes with it. And for the most part, those most receptive and even those inaccessible believe that's true of the sector. So that's another strength to reinforce. Also, good news is, this is not a sector that many people think the work isn't fulfilling or interesting. So if you go, again, back to that list of items that I showed you earlier of what matters, the top 3 are pretty strong places for your sector to be in. There's no big gap there. And so that's a solid foundation in which to build affinity. Similarly, there's pretty extensive belief that where people live, there are opportunities. So I don't need to travel outside of my home community. I don't need to go somewhere I don't want to be. That's a big challenge for young people in trying to get them to come to work. They believe they can find opportunities in your sector where they live. And so another important foundation going forward. The last item that's important to reinforce is most young people who are receptive to the sector, and by a 2-to-1 margin, those inaccessible believe they can find good work-life balance within the sector. And so there's no perception or high level of view that this is a career that's going to limit my ability to balance my work and life, that's not going to give me the opportunities to do some of the other things I want to do. And that's a solid position. So again, all of these are strong positions of strength to go on. The last thing that I think is most important is, in a world where we talk all the time about displacement, right? And jobs being eliminated because of technology. Understanding perceptions around your sector in the future is important. And what we find is that almost all of those most receptive to the sector believe that the number of jobs in the sector over the next 10 years will increase. So that's a signal that there's going to be opportunities, that my job won't disappear, that I've invested the time and the money in a career, that I won't be displaced down the road. One of the other things I always caution sectors and employers to talk about is not to double down almost on the idea that there are a lot of jobs in my sector. And the reason I say that is people don't instinctively want to work in a place where they will feel nobody else wants to work there. So while you want to signal there are opportunities and the sector is going to continue to grow because of electrification, because of turnover in terms of generational change, that if you appear desperate for people, they might then ask the question, why is it that nobody wants to work in your sector? So balancing those two, I think, is really important when connecting and speaking about your sector going forward. We also looked at some things you have to change and some perceptual barriers that might prevent some people from considering a career. One of them being people like me work in the sector. Now, that's not a problem for those open and most receptive to working in electricity. Almost all of them say, I see people like me in this sector. But look among those who say they're inaccessible or they wouldn't consider a career in electricity. More of them believe this is false. They don't see themselves. And so, why is it so important to continue to increase diversity, continue to attract women? Because it has a domino effect in that the more I see people like me in these industries doing this kind of work, the more I'm going to feel that it's right for me. And that identity piece is particularly important. Perhaps the greatest barrier, and I don't think this comes as a surprise, is perceptions around safety. And the gap between the most receptive and the inaccessible here is something that's really important. And again, I don't think surprising, but confirms, I think, what a lot of us believe. Now, most people most receptive to the sector believe that it's safe. About 1 out of 4 say maybe it's not the safest work out there. But among those inaccessible, you have a much higher level of both uncertainty about the safety of the sector and a profession within it, and a high level of those who say no outright, it's not safe. And so that matters not just to the young person you're trying to communicate with, it matters to their influencers, their parents, their guidance counselors, those in their life that are going to be sounding boards and influencers in their decisions. Continually talk about it, and I know it's a top priority of your sector, but continuing to do that is really important in talking about safety and the safety culture that your organizations each have, but also as a sector overall. Another key question that the survey tried to explore is what sectors are you or we competing with, and understanding that competition, because we don't operate in a vacuum, and you are competing consistently with other sectors who I have worked with, some of them, who are just as keen and just as motivated to get young people to reconsider and to consider a career in those sectors. And the good news among the most receptive, and that's why, and I'm looking at that group because they, as you see here in this first bar, almost all of them say they would be open or might consider a career in electricity when we ask this question in a comparative sense. They're also open to a number of other sectors and much more likely than others to be looking at, for example, construction, mining, manufacturing. But even among those that you would think are probably more in line with more types of work in your sector, they're also open to healthcare, financial services, and tourism. And the point of this is, and it's part of the storytelling we tested, is as your sector moves more and more towards big data, blockchain, technology-based, you're competing for people who may not have historically thought of themselves as wanting to work in the sector, but have far more options. That every sector now is moving in that direction. And so if you're trying to compete for that person who studied computer science or engineering, they probably have opportunities in all of these sectors, even in hospitality and tourism, which you may not think of, but as those sectors move towards big data and other types of innovation, there's going to be a lot of competition there. Among those less receptive, not least receptive, to working in the sector. You can see electricity still higher than some of these others, but they're also open to these other sectors as well. And so that's just again, confirmation that very few people these days pigeonhole themselves into one sector. It's much more, if you're going to think of like the equation of how somebody decides what to do, the type of work, the functional role of work is one aspect. And then what does the sector, me working in a particular sector matter? Those two, I think, work together in producing a decision that people are thinking about. The last section I want to talk about is the story. I guess you can't go anywhere these days and not hear somebody say, tell a better story, right? But it's so important because stories are how we connect emotionally and logically to whatever it is we're going to do. And a career, the thing we're going to do and spend most of our time doing in a large part of our life is an important decision. And so feeling a connection, understanding what the sector is about and why I fit in it is really important. So we wanted to test a number of messages. And what we did is we asked respondents whether, and I'm simplifying it here, but we provided people a little bit of text and we asked them, does this message, does this story pull you, make you more likely to want to work in the sector? Does it make you less likely or have no impact? So I call this a pull and push. Does it pull me in or does it push me away? And we tested a whole number of different frames. For example, we told respondents that the sector is moving heavily towards renewable energy, going green. It's critically important. As Mr. Lefebvre mentioned earlier, that the sector moves in this direction if Canada and the world, in fact, are going to meet the climate crisis head on. And you can see that is a big pull for those most receptive already. It has no real impact on the inaccessible, but 1 out of 5 who said, I'm not interested, actually then says, well, wait a second, maybe that's a reason I should consider it, right? So my advice is don't focus on this number being too high or it not being as high as you want. If you're able to attract even a small portion of those inaccessible, that is broadening the tent and expanding it. When we tell people that, for example, electric vehicles and the growing and the need for more people to convert to those over time will create new demands on the system, on the grid, will create new opportunities for research and development. That's a very strong pull for those already receptive and a substantially higher pull for those inaccessible, right? That's an important story. People often don't realize how much work and effort it's going to take to improve our grid, to innovate our system in order to meet the demand that increased electrification is going to bring. That's a story that can both tell people there's value, i.e. you have purpose, but also that this is going to be a long-term sector that's going to continue to grow. When we tell people there's growing need for skills and those that understand how to use blockchain and big data and the growing technological data-driven side of the sector, that too pulls quite a bit of those receptive to the sector already and a sizable number of those who were inaccessible to it. Again, reframing, getting people to think about this sector away from likely the image they have, which is that, and I live in Ottawa, so Ottawa, Hydro Ottawa truck that drives by near power lines, to something that is much bigger than that. And they can imagine themselves being part of it. And it's not to say those jobs aren't important and you need to recruit for them, but that you can get more people interested in understanding the opportunities. We tested things like the need for smart grids and the role that technology and advanced skills and different skill sets are going to be required. You can see there, not as strong a pull for those most receptive, but still over 3 out of 4 say that's important. When we tell people that Canada's energy and electricity grids are the cleanest in the world, that's a huge pull, particularly for those inaccessible, right? It allows them to I think, overcome potential barrier where they feel they're working in a sector that doesn't align with their values or doesn't align with, their desire to work in a sector that's doing good, that's making a difference. that helps reinforce their storyline. When we speak specifically about the need for skilled labor in Ontario to help refurbish the Ontario nuclear plants, that too has some pull, as you would expect, not as strong, given some people's hesitation around nuclear energy. But even among those most receptive, you see a pretty high number there, meaning that story isn't going to send people, away, but probably wouldn't be the one I put front and center. But once you have them in the conversation, it's going to confirm that there's going to be a lot of well-paid jobs going forward. Last point I'll make, and both Michelle and Mr. Lefebvre mentioned the need to increase diversity in the sector. We were able to have, fairly large samples, certainly of women, young women, but also of Indigenous members of that community, as well as racialized groups. And just 2 points about this, because it shows the opportunity. First is, when we ask people, as I said earlier, do you see people like me working in the sector? True or false? And you can see among those who were most inclined to want to work in the sector, upwards of 80% said, I see people like me there. But among these three groups, it's lower. It's particularly low among women. So the gender gap that exists in the sector is well understood outside of it. And so continually demonstrating the role that women are playing in the sector, the desire and the interest that the sector has in attracting women is going to be important, because unless this perception is increased or improved, that's going to continually be a barrier. But those in racialized communities, those Indigenous, young Indigenous communities, they are almost as likely to say they see themselves, and the Indigenous numbers, I think, very promising. And it aligns with, this is some of the good news. When we ask, again, in this survey, we ask people, what's the likelihood that you would consider working in electricity? Indigenous Canadians or Indigenous people are more likely than others to say they are open to working in the sector. Those from racialized communities are just as likely. So that's a signal here that race, ethnicity isn't necessarily a perceptual barrier, and that if there's an interest and a desire to continue to increase diversity, it will be there. The bigger challenge likely will be young women, and that's not unique to your sector, but there's still, I would say, 1 out of 3 is a good number to build off of, and there's opportunities there going forward. So to wrap up, I know there's lots of data, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit through it. I come back to what I started with, and that is, I've been doing these kinds of studies for a number of years now, and I'm continually trying to break perceptions and stereotypes about the generation, that this is a generation, whether you're talking about millennials or Gen Z, of people who don't want to work hard, that they're entitled. I don't believe that's true. I think that's true of some people in every generation, but to paint an entire generation with that brush is not helpful, first of all, and likely not going to win you supporters among those that you're trying to recruit. But if you understand what matters, and I think in a post-COVID world, the fact that salary and security were high up on that list will be even more important. And so here you are as a sector that is not going anywhere. In fact, demand is going to go up. You have a compelling story that aligns with the things people are looking for the most. But that's often not enough. And so what do you then say to people when they ask, but what does it say about who I am? Because I can get a pretty good salary and good security in other professions or other sectors. And that's where the storytelling comes in. The third point I'll say is, the safety question is something to be continually mindful of, and to confront head on, and to talk about the success and the diligence that your sector has in creating safe workplaces for people. And finally, what this study clearly demonstrated is you have a story you should all be proud to tell, that it is compelling, that it's positive, and that it aligns with particularly young people, their deep concern about climate change, their deep concern about a transition away from fossil fuels towards renewables. And you are at the cutting edge of not just doing research and developing new technologies, but actually putting it into place. And without more people doing it, it's never going to happen. That's a powerful call to action that I think you can repeat. So I encourage you to think about these three groups, and the report goes into much more detail about each of them. But as I will end with, I think you have a lot of opportunity. I think your sector is well positioned, strong reputation, good outlook, and now it's just about converting that into more young people applying for jobs and feeling good about that decision. So, Michelle, I will stop there, and we can answer some questions.
Thank you, David. I think, and of course, I've seen the report many times at this stage, but I always think it's fascinating how some of those, as you say, those misperceptions and those myths are out there in the industry. And you talk about values, and I think a lot of people have thought about millennials and Gen Z generation that, you know, value supersedes everything else, including good pay and good salary. And at the end of the day, everybody is trying to, you know, have a roof over their head and perhaps have a family. And as you say, want the same things that generation after generation has traditionally wanted. So it is so important to bear that in mind. And of course, you know, we need to make sure that we continue to look after those and ensure that if we have interns and co-ops, that we are paying them for the work that they are doing as well too. And remember that whole storytelling that you talk about, that piece and how you represent your organization, that starts even when you have those young people looking to work in your company, yeah. Right? Even if it's for a 3-month co-op placement, because that's an experience that they have, that's an impression that they have of your company and the industry overall. So we can't start that conversation too early.
Absolutely. And it's really important, you know, you're a sector that doesn't get a lot of coverage in pop culture, right? You're not on people's radar in a natural, easy way. And it's hard, it's going to be very difficult to get into that mix. So you have to instead, you know, be strategic in thinking about that story and who you tell it to, and making sure that universe around that person that you are interested in recruiting. You know, we did an interesting exercise in this survey where we asked people, if you were to go home, I didn't show you the results, and tell your mom or dad that you're going to join the sector, how would they react? And we used all these different emojis. Some of those reactions, in thinking about that, how would a parent react to their kids saying, I want to work for, you know, Hydro Ottawa? How would they react? And I think, you know, it's probably positive, but you need to reinforce that and give them evidence.
I do see one question here, and for those who are least receptive, that category, was there any indication that they were aware at all of the variety of jobs in the electricity sector? I would,
it appears no. And I think that's something that's important, right? We didn't talk a lot about it in the presentation, but it's always, you know, as I said, there's an image that people will naturally have when I say electricity sector, and they will instantly say, well, that's not for me. So you have to constantly be reminding them and showing them about the range of jobs. And I think, you know, someone just commented on our chat here that the competition with, you know, high tech and social media kinds of work means that people will eventually realize I can do certain functions, certain types of tasks in most sectors, but the job titles are not necessarily clear. And that's, I think, how a lot of young people think about work, is like, what's my title going to be? And so thinking creatively about that, I think, in the sector might also help get people to differentiate between the range of jobs that might exist.
I have loads of questions I'd love, but I know we're short on time and we better keep on track because we have a great panel coming up. But I know we'll look forward to continuing this discussion, David, and particularly I think the impact of COVID as well too is going to be interesting to see what impact that has had on perceptions of the jobs. I know that in some countries in the post-secondary education programming, the applications for essential worker type programs, like the medical field, for example, has actually gone up. It has actually increased. And I wonder, will we see something like that as well, too, as we move forward? So lots to move on. So thank you so much. I'd like to now welcome our guests today. So we have with us Matthew, Dee, and Shannon. Looking forward to a good conversation, your views and your perspectives of both your careers in the industry, of course, and also many things that may have surprised you or jumped out at you in the report. So I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. So Dee, why don't we start off with you?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Dee. I am a Gen Z, so I'm 20 years old, and I am a student who is going through the electrical engineering technician industrial program. So basically, I'm just learning all the different types of electricians and being able to practice with multiple different materials. And I'm just getting started in the trade, and I'm also an ambassador with Kick-Ass Careers.
Thank you, Dee. Matthew, I'll jump over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Matthew Marger. I'm a millennial. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a nuclear engineer working at the Darlington Nuclear Power Plant for Ontario Power Generation. I've been in the electricity sector for 7 years now, and I'm also the Canadian Operations Officer at North American Young Generation Nuclear, a board member with the Canadian Nuclear Association, and a young professional member with the Energy Council of Canada.
You can tell Matthew's a high achiever, eh? Shannon, over to yourself.
Well, my name's Shannon Tomasco. Apparently I'm still a youth, so thank you very much. I'm 31 years of age and I fall into that millennial category. I'm a first-year electrical apprentice with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Hamilton, Local 105, and I'm an ambassador for Kick-Ass Careers.
Fantastic. Shannon, sticking with you, do you want to sort of just fill us in a little bit on how you actually got started in your career path here in the electricity industry?
I was actually at a job that I disliked. I was really looking for job satisfaction. You spend more time at work than you do at home. And my friend purchased a home. We, one day just started renovating and pulling things apart, and I didn't realize, until I was in my late 20s that this was something that I was passionate and enjoyed. Based on, those kind of experiences that I had, I started looking for other options, and I found a pre-apprenticeship program with the YWCA here in Hamilton, and that's how I started my journey. So I completed that process, and now I'm working away.
Fantastic. Dee, what's your story? How did you get started?
I started quite late in high school. I was all lined up to go to university for the study of meteorology up until grade 12, where I did a complete 180 and tried out a trade class. I come from a very academic high school, so the only trade class we had was a custom woodworking. So I took that and I really loved it, and I met Jamie McMillan, who really kind of, when you go back to what you're saying about seeing people like me in the trade, that was my position where I saw Jamie, and that was really amazing. So I then went to Conestoga for the power line technician program. I didn't quite love it, so I switched to the program I'm currently in, and I'm loving every second of it.
Matthew, over to you.
Yeah, so I really wanted to get involved with engineering. I wanted something that was stable, that had a pension, but I also wanted to make a difference as well. So in high school, I started to research pollution, research how we could combat climate change, and nuclear really intrigued me. So went to UIT, did my nuclear engineering degree there, and then really the internship program at OPG was a great way to transition from engineering in school to the real world, and luckily through that I've been working in the nuclear sector for OPG ever since.
So it's interesting listening to you. So the idea of seeing somebody actually in the sector and getting to meet those people and talk to them really influenced your thought process as you thought about a possible career in the industry, right? That's I always think that's so interesting, because we always gravitate to a sector or a job, sometimes based on the people that we know that we are working in it. Shannon, once you started working in the sector, was there anything that surprised you?
I have a background originally in social work, management, customer service, very business background. And so I found a lot of the leadership styles previous employments was about growth, development, of your staff. And it was a lot of, development of people. So it is a very different world working in the construction world. The leadership is most certainly different in how you motivate and inspire people. And I find that the process, people, procedures are just really hesitant to change. Even if it is, you can explain that this is the best for the business, this is the best cost decision, all of those things. I do find that they're very hesitant for change. And so that was something that was a bit of a surprise.
Matthew, yourself?
Yeah, I was just shocked at how many people worked in nuclear. I imagine kind of a nuclear station would only have a couple people in it. But for example, here at Darlington, we almost have 3,000 people. And there's trades, there's lawyers, there's communications officers, there's procedure writers, there's marketers, there's all these different people. And that really surprised me. I don't know, I just had a limited kind of opinion going through nuclear engineering in school that, you just need a couple people to design it and then it'd run itself. And but I was just shocked how many people worked in the electricity sector.
And that's very relevant, of course, to the conversation that we've just heard today and the research findings where it's the lack of awareness about the depth and breadth of career opportunities or job types that are actually available in the sector, right? Everyone thinks of the iconic power line worker, or lots of folks, even if they don't work in the electricity industry, think of electricians. They don't necessarily even understand the difference between a construction or a residential electrician and all those nuances, right? So again, that's where part of the big communications piece is going to be so important. Dee, any surprises for you early in?
Well, actually, I would like to echo Matthew quite a bit there. When I started, I had a very, I was very short-sighted with seeing everything. I thought your classic electrician was the big guy that came into your house and fixed your light. So I was really, really shocked to see all the different types of electricians, from working on big solar panels to little tiny chips to put in your phone. Like it was really shocking to me to see that and all of the different types of materials that electricians use.
Now, we heard in the report and David's presentation about the things that millennials and the Gen Z generation value, the things that we talked about: values, pay, salary, all those other things, work-life balance, those types of things, opportunities. Did that resonate with you? What sort of things out in the report resonated you in regards to that component? Matthew, do you want to start?
Yeah, and this is the thing I think there's a misconception with millennials and Gen Z is we still want a house, we still want to be able to pay rent, we still want to have a pension, we want to have the job security. We're not risk seekers. A lot of us that want to start in a startup basement internet type of startup company, a lot of us want to be connected with our coworkers, and we want that fulfilling satisfaction, that story that we can tell others, how we're making a difference, why our job matters, and how we're giving back. So I think the top four that were highlighted, pay, job security, lifestyle, and fulfilling, really resonate. And really that's been the big thing I've noted that I really like is, pay and job security are huge, but does your company have a culture that allows you to give back? Is it something you're proud of? And I think that's really what millennials and Gen Z are looking for.
Feel like they're making a contribution, right, to the organization. Shannon, the same question to yourself.
I agree with everything Matthew just said about resonating with the article, especially with the top four ones and security and pay. What I do find interesting that wasn't highlighted, and I think is really important for millennials, you know, it was talked about earlier about how millennials have really high expectations these days. And one of the things not discussed in the report was work environment. I can't help but, again, I talk about, you know, construction maybe a little bit, few steps behind, you know, these big corporate companies like Google, and, you know, where their focus is really on their team, their people. And so culture is something that I think is something that really needs to be trickled down, right down to, you know, the construction site, where it's maybe not necessarily something that's, you know, changed yet, or is, you know, needs to make a slow change to something.
Yeah, I think it's really important if we're trying to attract and recruit people to the industry. Organizations need to look at their culture, right? They need to take a sort of that self-assessment and try and look at it from an outside perspective. What is you know, if I was to ask our employees to talk about our culture and our organization and our values, would that be good? Would that be a good thing? Because that's what young people, I think, pay attention to. Dee, what about yourself?
Well, I've always been striving for a career with good pay, pension, job security. My parents have always stressed the importance of that. So I think that there is a high expectation for millennials and Gen Zs to find that, because that is what has been preached to us, which is really important, to get good benefits, and all of that. So that's something that I really resonated with those statistics. So yeah, I just think a lot of young people are really looking for that and expecting it.
So I guess my next question, David had referenced it in just at the tail end there. We didn't have time to get really in detail. There's more detail, of course, in the report, but it, you know, if you go home and you talk to your parents, we have sort of icons, like emojis, you know, would your parents be crying, or would they be excited and delighted and all that sort of thing? And I think that's really important, because we also need to consider the influences in our life, right? Whether it's a high school teacher, it's somebody like Jamie that you've met, it's a parent, and so that's important. So what do your friends and family think about your career? Dee, I'll go back over to you.
Well, my friends and family are actually quite proud of me. I'm the first person in my family to enter the trades. So it's all a big learning experience, and everything is new to us, but the support that my family gives me is incredible. And it was actually my dad's idea to look into the trades, and specifically electricity.
Shannon?
Well, my biggest fan is my 4-year-old nephew, Kyson. He wants to grow up to be a construction worker just like Auntie Shannon. But overall, my friends and family are quite supportive of me. I don't really know if they quite know what I do on a day-to-day basis. I know I can hear in my mom's voice, she's got a little bit of concern for my safety. But I like to remind her every day at work, I'm in control of my safety. There's tons of jobs out there. Like I said, social workers, teachers, these guys experience unsafe situations too, not always within their control. I'm in control of my safety at work. And so my family, friends, very supportive about my new journey. And yeah.
Matthew?
So in the nuclear industry, we saw that the impression was largely not as supportive as with renewables. And this is what I've seen is when the friends and the family understand what nuclear does, how we use isotopes for cancer research, how we use it for sterilizing food, how we're one of the cleanest for fighting climate change and reducing pollution, and really selling that story, they become much more supportive. So I think that's another thing that David highlighted is it's that storytelling, and then, you know, getting your job to how it helps impact the community. So they started out not too sure, but they've become much more supportive as we've learned more.
Now, I'll stay with you, Matthew, just, and I know we've about 5 minutes left. What would you want other people, including students who are perhaps in high school right now, who are starting to think about their careers, what would you like them to think about working in the industry, working in electricity?
So I would just say that there's so many job offerings out there. to really not be discouraged, to really look into it. If you're an animator, if you're a communications expert, if you're a Twitter expert, there's so many different jobs and careers. Don't be discouraged by the lack of diversity. Be the one to change it, and really start to change this industry and start to look at how we can combat those long-term goals of fighting pollution, energy security. Especially we see it for COVID. Everyone started to panic that they're going to run out of toilet paper, but no one really started to panic that they needed a generator, because without electricity, the grocery stores would not have enough food, hospitals would not be able to treat people. So I'd say start to look at how important electricity is and start to consider a role in that in the future.
Shannon, same question.
Just to continue on, I was going to say endless opportunities in the electrical field. You know, there's travel, there's chances to travel. There's, you know, different avenues you can take, renewable energy. You can work in transportation. You can work in signals. There's so many different avenues that, you know, it really is an open door for you. And the other thing that I really think is great for high schoolers is you can get an education without accumulating a bunch of debt. This is like a nice way to start your life, opposed to the other alternative, maybe ways to go. There's programs that you can start in high school. Ontario Youth Apprenticeship Program. You can start your career, your dreams in high school. And I'm very envious when I see those young 20-year-olds on my job site, and they're already, you know, they've got a down payment for a house because they, you know, found their passion kind of young. And so if there's something, I'd say go try different things and you know, see if electricity is for you, because there are so many opportunities.
Dee, what would you want to tell other young people
Again, it's
starting out?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record because we're all basically saying the same thing, which is try it. There are shop classes, there are co-ops, there are so many things in high school that kids or students, young adults don't understand, that they're given a great opportunity to try things without spending thousands of dollars. So I would also say, specifically for the electricity trade, there are so many different paths. If you like working outside, there's something for you. If you like working inside, there's something for you. If you like sitting around, we could probably find something for you as well. So there's so many different type of electricians and jobs and careers that you can find almost anything you're looking for in the electricity sector.
And I think to remind people as well is that all of those things are fabulous, and the different types of careers, and you may have different jobs within the sector. You can move, you can have different career paths over your career, right? You don't necessarily have to do the one thing for the 30 years. You can actually move around, and I think that's exciting in and of itself, to know that you can have that different type of career path as you move through your career, and hopefully pay it forward, and train and inspire other people. Well, listen, it's almost time to wrap up. I want to thank all three of you. I have to say, I'm very inspired listening to your stories. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you're fantastic advocates and leaders in our industry. So thank you so much for your time today. We are going to wrap up. We just got a couple of minutes left. I do want to thank everybody. I think I speak for everybody, and I know especially at EHRC, when we say that we really value your contributions and the perspectives that you've all brought to the table. Thank you to David Coletto from Abacus Data, of course, for doing a great job with the presentation and taking those questions. And many thanks, of course, as well to our Parliamentary Secretary, to the Ministry of Natural Resources Canada, for joining us today. I'm excited to hear more about those two initiatives. Again, I just want to thank the sponsors of the report, the ASO, Electra, Skills Canada, and the Society of United Professionals. Again, all organizations who are so committed to supporting the next generation of youth who are looking to work in this industry. To everybody who's been with us today, I hope it's given you something to think about. It certainly has for us as we work and move forward to build that sort of resilient workforce of the future. You can visit electricityhr.ca to get a copy of the report. It has just been downloaded right now. And of course, we will share a copy of this recording should you wish to share that amongst your peers and with other folks. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the summer, and take care.